The nursery was quiet, save for the soft hum of the baby monitor and the occasional rustle of leaves outside the window. 6-month-old Emma lay in her crib, her tiny body still and fragile, her breathing shallow. She had been born with a rare condition that left her paralyzed from the neck down. Her parents, Sarah and Michael, had spent every waking moment since her birth trying to give her a life filled with love, even as they grappled with the crushing weight of helplessness. Sarah sat in the rocking chair beside the crib, her eyes red from crying. She had barely slept in weeks, her mind racing with questions that had no answers. Why Emma? Why us? She reached into the crib and gently brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. Emma's eyes fluttered open for a moment, her gaze locking onto Sarah's before she drifted back to sleep. Downstairs, Michael was pacing the living room, his hands clenched into fists. He had always been the strong one, the problem solver, but this was beyond him. He felt like he was failing his family and the guilt was eating him alive. He stopped pacing and looked out the window, where their golden retriever, Max, was lying in the grass, his tail thumping lazily against the ground. Max had been a constant presence in their lives, a source of comfort and joy. But even he seemed to sense that something was wrong. "What are we going to do, Max?" Michael whispered, his voice breaking. The dog tilted his head, as if he understood but offered no answers. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of barking. She rushed downstairs to find Max standing at the front door, his tail wagging furiously. On the doorstep was a small cardboard box, and inside was a tiny, shivering puppy with matted fur and big, soulful eyes. A note was taped to the box. "Please take care of him. He needs you as much as you need him." Sarah picked up the puppy and held him close, feeling his rapid heartbeat against her chest. She didn't know who had left him there or why, but in that moment she didn't care. The puppy felt like a sign, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had consumed their lives. She brought the puppy upstairs and showed him to Michael, who was sitting by Emma's crib. "Look what Max found," she said, her voice trembling. Michael reached out to pet the puppy, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah saw a flicker of something other than despair in his eyes. They named the puppy Charlie, and from the moment he entered their home, he seemed to sense that Emma was different. He would curl up beside her crib, his eyes never leaving her face, as if he were standing guard. Sarah and Michael didn't know what to make of it, but they were grateful for the comfort he brought. One night, as Sarah was putting Emma to bed, she noticed something strange. Charlie was sitting upright, his ears perked, his eyes fixed on Emma. Sarah watched as the puppy let out a soft whine, his tail wagging slowly. She leaned closer to the crib and gasped. Emma's hand, her tiny paralyzed hand, was twitching. Sarah called for Michael, her voice shaking with disbelief. They both stood by the crib, holding their breath as they watched Emma's fingers move ever so slightly. It was the first sign of movement they had seen since her birth, and it felt like a miracle. Over the next few days, Emma's movements became more frequent. She would wiggle her toes, lift her arms, and even smile when Charlie was near. Sarah and Michael couldn't explain it, but they didn't care. Their daughter was responding, and that was all that mattered. As word of Emma's progress spread, so did the skepticism. Doctors, friends, and even strangers questioned whether Charlie was truly responsible for her improvement. "It's just a coincidence," they said. "Dogs can't perform miracles." Sarah and Michael tried to ignore the doubters, but it was hard. They began to question themselves, wondering if they were seeing what they wanted to see rather than what was really happening. The stress took its toll, and soon they were arguing more than they were talking. One night, after a particularly heated argument, Michael stormed out of the house. Sarah sat on the floor of the nursery, tears streaming down her face, as Charlie curled up beside her. "What if they're right?" she whispered. "What if this is all in our heads?" Charlie nuzzled her hand, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. In that moment, Sarah realized that it didn't matter what anyone else thought. Charlie had brought them hope when they had none, and that was enough. The turning point came during a routine checkup at the hospital. Emma's doctor, Dr. Patel, was stunned by her progress. "This is incredible," she said, examining Emma's chart. "I've never seen anything like it." Sarah and Michael exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. "Do you think it could be because of Charlie?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Dr. Patel hesitated, then nodded. "I can't explain it, but there's no denying that Emma's improvement coincides with Charlie's presence in your home. Animals have a way of reaching us in ways we don't fully understand." The validation was a turning point for Sarah and Michael. They stopped doubting themselves and started embracing the miracle that was unfolding before their eyes. Charlie became more than just a pet. He was a member of their family, a symbol of hope and resilience. Months passed, and Emma continued to thrive. She was still paralyzed, but her movements became more coordinated, her smiles more frequent. Charlie was always by her side, his presence a constant source of comfort and joy. One day, as Sarah was folding laundry, she heard a sound that made her heart stop. She rushed into the nursery to find Emma sitting up in her crib, her tiny hands gripping the rails. Charlie was standing on his hind legs, his front paws resting on the edge of the crib, as if he were cheering her on. Sarah fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Michael," she called, her voice trembling, "come quick." Michael ran into the room, his eyes widening as he saw Emma. "She's sitting up," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "She's really sitting up." In that moment, they knew that Charlie was more than just a puppy. He was a miracle, a gift from whatever forces governed the universe. He had brought their daughter back to them, and in doing so, he had given them a second chance at life. Years later, Emma was a bright, energetic child who defied every expectation. She still faced challenges, but she faced them with a smile, her spirit unbroken. Charlie, now a full-grown dog, was always by her side, his loyalty unwavering. Sarah and Michael often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't need them. All they knew was that love, whether it came in the form of a child, a dog, or a family, had the power to move mountains. And as they watched Emma and Charlie play in the backyard, their laughter filling the air, they knew that their miracle was just beginning.